since Hopewell is borrowing the industrial use that we see at Jessup Place and Canton,
Right.
they're validating their ordinance as not being exclusionary. So if someone were to come into Hopewell and say, you know, there's this 50 acres, we want to build a steel mill there.
Yes.
Hopewell could deny it or say, well, it's been provided for in Canton, and if they did not want to rezone or permit that to happen, they wouldn't be facing an exclusionary zoning challenge.
Correct. To the second point that you made in terms of they would be able to offer to the applicant that the applicant would be able to do that kind of use in Canton as it is permitted there. It is not an obligation of Hopewell or West Middletown to provide for that use if someone were to request it, because it is available in another municipality, whether it's by right or by condition. But the fact that it's called out in that other municipality gives the opportunity then for an applicant to find the space or find the land or find a redevelopment, as we mentioned, and go and address that kind of thing there.
Okay. And how would the, in terms of the commercial overlay work in master planning and commercial district, give an example of how that could occur?
So this covers the commercial districts in total here in North Franklin. And if someone, an applicant is coming in and they want to take advantage of that master planning process, what that allows them to do is actually present the plan and then be able to go through sort of that review at the master plan level and get the comments on it, make sure that things like access points are being coordinated, all of those types of things. Really, it gets much more into, I'm going to say, the site planning perspective, and that there are a few uses, and I need to pull those out again, there are a few additional uses that have been added into that that are really oriented towards a redevelopment of property. The Planning Commission discussion, I think, largely focused on the fact that, say, something like the, at one of the meetings, the mall area was a discussion item. And it's a matter of when you have certain things, maybe as it relates to parking or, you know, the square footages of certain portions of that, what is applicable and what may not be applicable sort of to that site design. So it goes through the Planning Commission and the board, and really it's looking sort of at the sequence of the steps to that. And so we felt that was something, again, in the guise of also trying to identify to the public that this is a proactive step for redevelopment or infill kind of development too.
Okay. Supervisors, any questions of Carolyn? Okay, we're going to hold public comment until after we're done with the presentation. So, Michael, if you could come up to the... That's it. He doesn't need to be sworn in since he's an attorney. Take it back. Use this. Of course.
Is that on now, Bob?
Just leave it. We good there?
Testing.
Let me know if I need to readjust it.
Michael, why don't you approach this two ways? One, if you have to, since you were with Carolyn at every step, you represent, I believe, Hopewell and West Middletown. If you want to add to anything that she said about the process, but then the second part of it would obviously be to talk about the changes to the commercial vehicles.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's been touched upon. Carolyn's been involved with this much more in depth than I have, but just from the very beginning, group meetings with, and then breakout sessions. You know, she oversaw the very beginning, and then the breakout sessions with each municipality, kind of reviewing each one. Each one had separate needs. You know, this one we're here today to deal with North Franklin, but also looking if there's items to be borrowed from or not. So what she touched upon, essentially, the main aspects of that document that's, I think, 200 pages, but you know, 90% of it was already in place. It just needed updated. It needed to be conformed. And another one of the benefits that Carolyn's group was able to do is that ultimately, whatever form gets adopted, this will be put in Word version and it'll be online, so that you no longer have to go and get a hardbound copy. And just like when the oil and gas ordinance was adopted in January, that's 30 pages. If someone picked up that back in 2015, they wouldn't have any new adoptions outside of that. So what will make it easier for the township moving forward also is you'll have that master ordinance that'll be in a Word form, and it'll be online so people can access it easily, but also down the road when the township needs to make amendments, make adjustments, there won't be standalone ordinances that are floating around. They'll be able to incorporate directly into that master ordinance, so you can go online and everything will be in one place. So it should make it a much more user-friendly document down the road. So that was another benefit of going through this planning phase. So with that being said, one of the other items that was discussed at length over a year and a half with the Planning Commission, with the board, and I think earlier of this year, the board made a motion based on recommendations from the Planning Department to consider amending the commercial vehicle aspect of residential districts. And just to back up, the current ordinance is silent on it. It doesn't say one way or the other. It doesn't say you can have commercial vehicles. It doesn't say you can't have commercial vehicles. What it does say is that in residential districts, it lists the different uses that are by right or that are accessory to that use or that are by condition. For example, single-family dwelling, all those different types of residential district items. The question was brought up from residents in the township regarding, for commercial vehicles, are those allowed in a residential district? And the ordinance is silent on it. So they asked the township to review it. The township reviewed it. We looked into the case law. Township basically gave their response that it doesn't say you can't, it doesn't say you can. It went to court. A judge basically told the township that you need to get a declaratory judgment on that. It stayed at that point until another lawsuit was filed, and it's now currently in front of the Court of Common Pleas, of which the residents are asking for an interpretation from the court whether or not having commercial vehicles in a residential district rise to the level or permitted under the township's ordinance. And since the township's ordinance is silent, you run the risk of, if the judge makes a determination one way or the other, then the township has an order that they could, they would be stuck with. So trying to be proactive, one of the recommendations that was made from our office and from the board to the Planning Commission was, okay, go back, look at this. Also the Code Enforcement Office brought this up as well. Go back and look at this. Does the township want to set forth regulations for parking for commercial vehicles in residential districts? As I said, right now it's silent. It doesn't say you can, doesn't say you can't. If you don't take any action, you run the risk of you're going to be stuck with what the court determines. So the municipality's planning code allows the township to regulate this, but if it's not regulated, then we could be stuck with a court order. So with that in mind, the Planning Commission has reviewed this at length, multiple meetings. Supervisor Junko is on the Planning Commission. He can attest to that as well. But ultimately, what came about is a proposed recommendation for amending the parking and loading aspect for residential zoning districts. And that's what we have here. I don't know if you want me to read it or how you'd like to handle that. Okay, so again, just to keep in mind, this does not relate to running a business out of a residential district. If you want to run a business out of a residential district, there are ways to go about doing that, in which you have to go and get the proper approvals. What this is dealing with is what we're determining, what we're calling off-duty / personal use commercial vehicles. So vehicles that might have a realtor sticker or realtor plates on it, a work truck, there's a map tools truck. There's a list of items throughout the township. And actually, I think Matt and Jared went through and kind of gave the Planning Commission a list of that. And I think there's over 60 or so different items that would be classified as commercial related vehicles and items in the township. Right? So with that in mind, that's what we're getting at. We're not talking about being able to run a business out of a home, out of a residential district. You would have to go get the proper approvals for that. We're talking about individuals that come home for lunch or after work. They don't have, they have the work truck, and and that's what they use to commute there and to for. They park that on their residence. That's what we're dealing at. So the Planning Commission came up with a definition to add to the zoning ordinance because, again, it's silent. The proposal is for what's called an off-duty personal use commercial vehicle, which will mean and include, but is not limited to, vehicles with the following types of registrations: commercial, contractor, omnibus, used car dealer, and school bus. For the purpose of this chapter, any vehicle containing advertising matter intending to promote the interests of any business or any vehicle used in connection with the business, whether or not said vehicle is registered as a commercial vehicle with the Pennsylvania Division of Motor Vehicles, is considered a commercial vehicle. This shall also include any type of dump truck and or trailer used for transporting goods, equipment, and or passengers for compensation, including commodities, merchandise, produce, freight, animals, or passengers for hire. This shall only apply for commercial vehicles, including trailers that do not exceed 20 feet in length and 12 feet in height, being used for off-duty purposes, such as commuting to and from work. For purpose of this definition also, a connected trailer onto a commercial vehicle shall count as one vehicle. However, standalone trailers should count individually. So again, the idea was to try and define what a commercial vehicle is and to stress that this is for off-duty use, personal use, coming to and from work, lunchtime, evening time, mornings, in which you have to park in your driveway or somewhere on your property. These are the vehicles that are attempting to be addressed with this proposed amendment. So with that definition being said, the amendment is for parking and loading in Article 11 of the Township Zoning Office, or Township Zoning Ordinance. We would propose to add, it stops at 1106, we would propose to add another section, section 1107, off-duty personal use commercial vehicles in residential zoning districts. In the township, there's an R1, an R2, and an R3, so this would apply for all residential zoning districts. In all residential zoning districts, 2 off-duty personal use commercial vehicles per property. The other regulation would be no additional commercial vehicles are permitted in the R1, R2, and R3 zones unless located within a completely enclosed building. So again, if you want to have more than 2 of these vehicles on your property, you would have to have them enclosed, whether that's park them in your garage, build another garage, something to that effect. You just can't park them in your yard, in excess of the 2 vehicles that are being permitted, or being proposed to be permitted. There are also exceptions. This section shall not be construed to prevent temporary parking of emergency vehicles, delivery trucks, moving vans, and similar vehicles used for delivery of goods and services, nor the parking of commercial vehicles at any active job site or staging area with the appropriate permits and documentation. So again, the idea behind that is if this is an active work zone, you have the appropriate building permits, those things, obviously there's going to be more than 1 or 2 commercial vehicles there. So that's not what we're attempting to regulate here. Another exception is all businesses with proper approval to operate within residential districts must also have the approval for the location of additional commercial vehicles on the property. So again, the idea behind this is that these are off-duty parked after hours. So if you have an in-home based business, if you have a residential district, but there's already a commercial approved use in there, obviously there's going to be commercial vehicles there, but after hours, those items, in order to keep things parked there, you have to conform to these, just like anyone else in that district. This section shall not apply for temporary parking, moving of commercial vehicles from a building, garage, and a driveway. So once again, as we stated, you have to have things enclosed if you have more than 2. Obviously, there's going to come times where you're pulling those out to maneuver things, stuff like that happens. Obviously, that's not, if you're out there for 15, 20 minutes, the township's not going to be out there trying to, hit someone with a ticket when you're moving in and out of garages. Obviously, there's going to be some leeway there, and common sense has to apply. But that's what that section is attempting to address. And then finally, temporary placement is allowed and shall refer to the placement for less than 10 days within the calendar year of a commercial vehicle beyond the amount allowable by township code. Temporary parking in excess of 10 days shall be permitted in residential zones upon application and registration with the zoning officer for a temporary parking permit, which may be issued for a period not to exceed an additional 20 days total within a calendar year. So essentially what that's saying is if you know you're going to have an additional work vehicle or you have to store something, if you give the township notice, you can have up to 30 days to do so. So it gives you some time if there's not a vehicle. Again, the township's willing to work with people, not trying to hammer them. Okay, you already have 2, you're at your limit. If there's going to be something there, but basically what they're saying is If not, you have 30 days to make arrangements, whether that's to get a garage, whether to find another place to park your vehicle, whatever it might need to be done, whether it's fencing, whatever it might be. But it's given people a temporary period to come into compliance, subject to letting the township know. And also saying that no property shall be entitled to more than 2 temporary parking permits in a calendar year. Again, additional parking would require conditional use approval or zoning. They're in the zoning ordinance, just like if you're trying to meet certain aspects of it. If you have hardship, if there are legit reasons that you need to have another one, you can't put a garage, you can't have fencing for those aspects, there are means of relief, whether that's going through conditional use, whether that's going through zoning hearing board. There are other ways to get additional relief. But that's kind of the idea behind what this proposal is from the Planning Commission to the board.
Michael, you served as the advising solicitor of the Planning Commission through this process. What was the sentiment of the Planning Commission in dealing with this?
To be honest with you, this was brought up probably before the lawsuit even came about. This was brought up by Harold Ivory probably 3 years ago, and the Planning Commission didn't want to touch it, didn't want to regulate, didn't want to set a limit on it. And then we came back and kind of explained to them once the lawsuit was filed and once it kept progressing that if the Planning Commission, if the board ultimately do not adopt something, you're leaving it up in the hands of the judge to make a determination. So with that said, the Planning Commission actually wanted very light regulation, to be honest with you. But there was some input from some other individuals, concerned citizens, and ultimately they came into this. Essentially, they don't want it to look like a work area. The idea behind it is not to make it look like a work area so that you can't have 5, 6, 7 things just parked in your yard. The idea is to work with people. They, again, based on what Jared and Matt found, their recollection, their recommendation was this is a very blue collar area. People work, people have trucks. It's not a Peters Township for their what they're using. A lot of times you can't park a lot of items in residents like that. And they didn't want to be that restricted. They wanted to have people the chance to be able to earn a living, and if they need to do that, bringing their vehicles to and from work, they recommended that.
Okay, you referred to things that Jared studied. Maybe you can come up to the podium, be sworn in, and just kind of describe this document that will make it part of the record. You say that you'll swear you in.
Raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Is it J.A.
R.R.O.D.
and your last name?
D'Amico, D-A-M as in Michael, I-C-O.
Thank you.
Jared, your position with the township?
Code enforcement officer.
And do you participate in planning commission meetings or reviews?
At their request, yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the discussion concerning commercial vehicles being parked in residential neighborhoods?
Yes.
And were you asked by the board and by my office to basically do a review, if you will, of what the township looked like, where commercial vehicles were parked throughout the township, and make any conclusions?
Yes. At the request of the board in your office, Mr. Sweat, we did on 2 different afternoons around 4 o'clock, towards the end of our workday, we drove through the township. We didn't go up and down every street. We got a lot of it. And we were looking for things that could be classified as a commercial vehicle. Depending on where you look for definition of a commercial vehicle, PennDOT identifies it one way. Townships, different municipalities look at it different ways. Sometimes they do it by vehicle weight. Sometimes they do it by use. We looked for anything that could fall under that. So it was a Sprinter van, a panel van, tandem axle trailers that could be used for equipment. Trucks. We didn't look at pickup trucks because, again, without knowing where the weight limit was on those, if it was an unlabeled pickup truck, we didn't count that. Anybody can own a pickup truck. The other items that came up, box trucks. There was a military vehicle that was not for road use. We counted that because it was an odd item. Crane trucks. There was a potato chip truck and a Mac tool truck in a driveway. We didn't count campers per se, because typically they're personal use, but anything that appeared to be commercial in nature that could be construed to be a commercial vehicle, we counted.
Okay. And what did you come up with?
On this particular list, there were 36 addresses and about 40 vehicles, and this was counting vehicles and trailers separately. But that's what we came up with, about 40 vehicles over 36 addresses.
So those property owners could potentially be in violation of parking commercial vehicles, if you will, in a residential district without a delineation of that use in the zoning ordinance.
Correct.
Anything else to add? And did you cover the whole township, or that's?
No, we got up and down most of the main streets and some of the tributaries. We didn't go up and down every street.
So there could be more.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was just popular areas, I would say, well-traveled areas.
Okay. Good. Supervisor, any questions of Mr. Cooney or Mr. Domingo?
I do.
Okay.
Michael,
Yep.
you said 90% of this conglomerate of papers is just a rehash of the old ordinance. There's no change.
Is that a fair assumption? Yeah, input into a Word form, one document, correct? Okay.
And I think what a lot of people here are concerned about is the commercial ordinance part, which I have stated more than once that I'm really concerned about. Well, there are a couple of questions I still have is, okay, let's assume you have 2 gas and oil workers working in one home. What's the ordinance say?
If they have 2 vehicles, they would be.
What if they have 3 people?
They would have
working?
they would have to apply for a variance.
We'll put it inside a garage.
Or parking garage.
Okay. Who is going to ultimately be responsible for enforcement?
The township. It's like any ordinance that's on the books right now. I think they can speak more to that, but typically, just like this matter, I think it first came up in 2015, but when we looked, I think the ordinance was adopted in '89. You know, it went dormant for 20 years or more. Just like a lot of these, you can only react. You can only be so proactive, I guess. So once this comes on the books, I don't think Jared and Matt are going to be driving around the township looking for violations. Once it's brought to the board's attention and they're instructed to go and look into it and have a conversation and see if they can park it. I don't think the idea is to go around, giving people tickets, but ultimately, yes, it would be the township's job to
Right,
enforce it.
and I guess the point I'm getting to is I think what a lot of people in the township want is to make sure we have equal enforcement of the ordinance and not picking and choosing who we're going to enforce ordinances against. And I think that is a big part of this. And if everybody felt as though everyone was going to be treated equally, then there wouldn't be an issue. So that's where I'm still stumbling around with this.
And that would apply to any regulation that's on the books. That wouldn't just apply to this. Equal enforcement would apply. You already have regulations on the books. So if that's a concern, I completely understand where that would be a concern, and you want to keep it fair across the board. I wouldn't say that just applies to this. That would apply to anything that's already on the books or that's about to be on the books.
All right.
I think I can probably clear that up a little bit right now. The agreement that Harshman, as the code enforcement, has with all code enforcement items, whether it's commercial vehicles or anything else, is we work on a complaint basis. Those complaints come through this office, and they come to us after review by somebody. Once we get them, we look into it. So as far as fair, that's how we handle everything. If there's a complaint that's sent to us, we look into it. So the way that we currently work in the township, we don't patrol, we don't go look for things. Occasionally you'll run into something obvious like high grass on a main street, but we've never been one to go out and look for problems.
And we have mixed usage in the township. We have many senior citizens. We do have blue collar. We have white collar. So we have different groups within a residential district.
Correct.
And I think one of the concerns we have is to make sure that we maintain the quality of those residential districts. And I do understand, I'm not stupid, that the ordinance right now, in so many respects, could allow someone to park 10 vehicles there.
Correct.
So I'm weighing that. But I just want to make sure, Jared, that we're enforcing equally across the board.
Right, so unless the supervisors of the township were to contact our office and say, go out and look for this, again, we're not gonna go out and look for it, just like anything else at this point. We're a reactive organization. We work based on the complaints we receive from the office. So, again, we do that with everything. So I don't, the selective enforcement, in my opinion, Mr. Sapp, is a moot point at this point because of the way that we work for the township.
Well, plus, you know, that creates a defense for the property owner. In other words, if we go after an offending party, that offending party as a defense can say, why do you go after these 36 too? You're isolating on me. It is selective enforcement unless you don't enforce it across the books. That was the dilemma the township was facing when we saw what was going on. And that's something the planning commission considered. Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quickly, the purpose of code enforcement too is compliance. It's not to ticket people. It's not to give people a hard time. Should we come across one of these properties via complaint, it's our goal. We send certified letters